There's one thing everybody can agree upon, and that is we've never had the kind of tumult that we've got going right now. We've never had the kind of growing division, anxiety, and anger that we've got right now. This is why we created this channel. The news people, they'll tell you what's going on. They always tell you what just happened. Everyone spends their time discussing what already happened and what you should think about it. But there's a lot of questions from a lot of us about what is going to happen. That's the only things you can prepare for is what's coming. Nobody's discussing it. There's a lot of discussion away from the news in the public. People are trying to decide, is it just going to be riots in the summer? Why are the Democrats getting so crazy? How far are those people willing to go? What are we looking at? Is it World War III? The whole world is building tensions. This needs to be discussed. And if you want to know what to expect, the best framework to use for comparison is recorded history. And we've got an awful lot of it. So let's take a minute and look at the three possible scenarios. The riots, the Civil War, or an actual global war of World War III. We're going to look at all three of those possibilities in detail. If you want to look strictly at our American situation, a lot of people think that we're already in a civil war. Probably 8 years ago, one of my sisters was telling me we're already in a civil war. There's people that are still saying that today, and there's people that say that we are headed for a civil war. One thing is for certain, like the old quote about the house divided, a lot of people attribute that to Lincoln, but actually Christ said that in the Bible. A house divided against itself cannot stand. We know that someone must win and someone must lose, because we cannot continue to get further and further divided with all of the anxiety and anger and unrest that grows around that. It's not healthy for a country, and it never lasts. It has never lasted in history. Someone must win, someone must lose. So what does that look like? Civil war is obviously the result of extreme conflict and division, but that's not what we have right now. So what are we looking at for summer? Riots? What is the difference between riots and the Civil War? People that remember the past can tell you what the difference is. During the 60s, we had a lot more unrest than we've got right now. An awful lot more. The Democrat convention of 68, that was really ugly. There was a lot of riots, a lot of upheaval. 69 was a rough year. There was a lot of big riots. Anyone that remembers the Martin Luther King riots of 1968 will remember there was riots in over 100 cities. Was that Civil War? No. Civil War, to define it properly, you got to admit it boils down to two sides opposing each other with violence and people on both sides killing people on the other side. That's Civil War. As for civil unrest and civil disobedience, we're already seeing that. We're seeing that with Tesla fiasco, and that's all driven. There's an organizational structure behind it. Recently, Elon Musk has said that he's identified who the ringleaders are. They should be charged. He says that they will be. We've yet to see where that goes. Increased unrest is a certainty. It's going to happen because they've learned they can't achieve their goals politically, so they're trying to use the bully politics to achieve them socially. They want to scare people out of opposition. It's funny that the people who claim that they're trying to defend democracy will vandalize car dealerships, basically declare war against an American company because they couldn't get their way at the polls. That's how they defend democracy. We've got to consider what could happen this summer. Everyone in major metropolitan areas should at least have in the back of their minds the possibility of increased unrest. But the problem is it isn't just America. It's happening all over Western society. They're having the trouble in several nations of Europe. It is backed by and supported by, organized by, the same people that are organizing it here. This is a global problem with the war against Western civilization. Now, if there is an increase in the social unrest here, could it lead to a civil war? Yes, but it's not likely that's what we're looking at. People have to realize a civil war today It's easy to say that, but when we had our actual Civil War, times were different. Back then, you could hide an army behind a mountain. Armies would lose track of each other. You had supply trains going to armies. I mean, it was just a totally different situation. And what we've got today, with all the electronics that law enforcement has, and that the government has, I'm not convinced yet that we can really call all of our government agencies law enforcement agencies, even those that are supposed to be, because we know there are still a lot of renegades inside of them that haven't been weeded out yet. God knows they need to be, and I hope they will be. But right now, the bad guys could still get some help with the people who are already embedded within the agencies. However, a civil war here, what would that look like? It would have to look more like Northern Ireland, underground guerrilla groups that gain some sort of weaponry, build some sort of weaponry, and then make sporadic guerrilla type attacks. That would be a civil war today. You're not going to have large opposing forces, but it could sure make things ugly. It could make life awfully unsafe. It could destabilize the economic infrastructure of our country. It's not something that's going to be good. I don't believe it's going to happen yet. There's no indication really that it is. Right now, what we're looking at is the very real possibility of a lot of these Democrat activists getting increasingly out of control. That's to be expected, and how it is handled will determine how far they are willing to go. It's highly likely the bad guys here are going to step up efforts on a lot of different fronts. They already tried through the universities, and that didn't end well for the universities. It hurt their... So they're not going to allow that. They're not going to back it and support it like they did. But we already saw in recent memory where a large group of bad-acting Democrats took over a section of Portland, Oregon. They burned a police station, and nothing happened. Governor and local officials refused to react. And that emboldens them, so we know that there's going to be attempts like that made. I don't believe they're going to get away with it now like they did then, but that's still not a civil war. That's bad acting up. There was no opposition taking a stance of the 100 riots after the death of Martin Luther King was not civil war. 1969, they had the Stonewall riots in New York City. The cops raided a gay bar. It got out of hand. But that wasn't a civil war, even though there were persistent riots. So a lot of what people think is civil war, it isn't. It's just trouble that gets out of hand. The Rodney King riots, they were not civil war. Civil war today is most likely to come if we enter an actual global World War III. What we need to do is look at the possibilities of World War III, because that is increasingly likely. One thing for sure, the only thing mankind has ever been consistent about is killing each other. That's another thing that Christ spoke about. He even said they would be necessary. Sadly, there's no other way to put an end to the damage caused by bad nations, by bad leaders, without a war. Otherwise, they're just expanding their reach and becoming dangerous to more and more people. They've got to be stopped. But there is always conflict between nations of power. Right now, I had a grandmother that was born at a time when she saw World War I, had a family. Here came World War II, the Depression. What a time. People think we've got it bad now. Imagine what it was like then. But of course, the difference was America was an agrarian society back then. We had a lot of industry in the cities, but there were a lot of family farms. All the farming areas of the nation were dotted with family farms that were largely self-sufficient. They had their own chickens, they had their own gardens, they had their own hogs, they had their own cattle, they had their own milk. My grandmother told me basically they had to buy cloth. But she was always talking about the wars. I spent my summers on those family farms, and she was constantly talking about those wars. They'd impacted her that much. 40 and 60 years before, they'd impacted her that much. And I asked her one day, I said, Grandma, why do they keep having these wars if they're that bad? And she said something very profound that I've never forgotten. Her answer was, well, because things start to get bad. And everyone thinks that someone else is going to come along and fix it all. But nobody does. She said, one day you wake up and the world is different and it will never be the same again. Now, she lost a good share of her family in World War I. She was in Germany. And she left because she saw it coming. She saw the rise of the Kaiser. She knew it was bad. But she got out of Germany. Most of her family would not leave. She had one sister that was in the States. So she left, built a life here, and half of her family disappeared in the war, in the First World War. More of it disappeared in the Second World War. America was lucky because we were separated by oceans then, and that really mattered. Stop and think about it. Germany is smaller than Montana, and they started World War II. Japan, smaller than Montana. They were the greatest danger at the end of World War II. After Germany was whipped, the Japanese still weren't. Smaller than Montana, both of those countries, and they were the impetus behind the war. You know, it's kind of funny. People think that, well, it's not going to happen. Obviously, Europe is in a lot of trouble because they've been so infiltrated. They've been taken over from within in a lot of areas. And people are saying, well, that's their problem. We're not going to get involved. You know, they said that in World War I. For 2.5 years, America said we were not going to get involved in World War I. We had a lot of German and Italian immigrants here. Those people, they didn't want World War I. They didn't want us to be involved. America didn't want to be. But with all the attacks on the shipping lanes, which attacked our economy, it came to be that we got involved. We had to. You can't sit it out. World War II, we weren't going to get involved. We swore we weren't going to. We were convinced we were not going to. It was going to be a European war, not a world war. Then came Pearl. Obviously, there's going to be another world war. World War III is going to happen because that's what mankind has always done. And right now, the forces are building, the lines are being drawn, and there is already a global orchestrated attack on Western civilization. The organizational structure we see that has taken over the Democrat Party, that funds and fuels things like the Palestinian protest. You notice these things happen simultaneously in Europe and America. What do you think that is? It's because there's a global force behind it. There's a global force behind a lot of the division and unrest we have today. A lot of people around the world, a lot of the bad guys, think that now is close to the time to get the ball rolling. Foreign nations have been planning this for a long time. A lot of people don't realize this, but Russia and China were engaged in war games, practice games together 25 years ago. In the last couple of years, I've heard people in right-wing media discussing the fact, well, Russia and China are starting to form an alliance. No, they did that 25 years ago. Iran had joined them. North Korea, of course, they're run by a nutcase, but they're not going to come down on our side. When they get involved, and they would not sit it out, when they get involved with their 1 million man army, they'll be on the side of the other guys. When you're the big dog in the world, you're the one with the little dogs nipping at your heels. Over the past couple generations, trade and manufacturing has developed an imbalance that didn't used to be there. Or maybe it's a balance. The U.S. power and dominance has shifted. We made the mistake of teaching a lot of these people manufacturing. The truth is, it would have happened anyway. You can't. But the people who have picked up manufacturing, who have developed it, they develop weapons just like everyone else, just like it's always happened through history. We've got a large problem with a certain religion that has expanded around the world. There's an extremely warlike people. They're heavily armed. Now, they're not allies of Russia, certainly not allies of China, because China is extremely hard on them. They don't want the interior problem. But they would all be on the same side, united against the West, at such a time when World War III develops. All of these people know that. The forces that would be wielded against the West are enormous. No single one of them could harm us by themselves, but it would take everything we have to stop it, and they know this. There's a lot of things that have been changed. China has built themselves a huge navy. Enormous, bigger than ours. They built the One Belt, One Road system that stretches deep into Africa. They've got the only hardened military base in Africa. Now we've got the conflict with Arctic oil reserves. China and Russia both have their eyes on that. They're sick of our influence and power. That's why China has spent so much time and money getting a footprint in Central America, which fortunately we debased them down in Panama. But they've got a big footprint around the world that stretches far beyond China, and they've got the ability to shut off 70% of the world trade right there in the South China Sea. 70% of the trade goes through that one region. China can shut it down in a heartbeat, and there's nothing we can do about it. People need to consider, when we lose 70% of trade, which includes pharmaceuticals, what would that impact be? So World War III is a very likely possibility. It's going to happen at some time. The only question is when. But it's building up to happen soon. And that's something everybody needs to be well aware of. Because that's not going to be a war where you just sit at home and watch it on TV. In the past world wars, citizens had to get involved. They had metal drives. People in the farms would always have a dump somewhere on the place where they'd thrown away everything they couldn't use, including old farm equipment, worn out cars. They went around and collected all that stuff. The farmers would take all their old metal and leave it out by the roads. The government would send trucks by to pick it up because it was needed. Everyone knows about Rosie the Riveter. The women were doing the manufacturing because the men were gone. The healthy men were gone to war. A World War III is not a war that people are going to sit out. Everyone will suffer. There was rationing for fuel. There was rationing for a lot of products. That would happen again out of necessity because international trade would be limited. All the diet choices that we've got right now, a lot of our food is imported. Supply chains are one of the first things that are attacked. Now communications would be. But we'll talk about that in the coming episode about what would World 3 really look like today, because there's a lot to think about. But when you start to look at what's happening and what's coming, riots, yes, I would expect that. They're going to make their effort. Whether or not they get away with it depends upon how the response is handled. Civil war, no. But I'll guarantee you, if World War III does start, there will be civil war here, just because of the fact that the bad guys here would take advantage of the situation and they'd cause their trouble because they're still influenced and controlled by whoever is controlling this global power. They would be inspired, led to, and organized into conflict here, and the American citizens here, out of fear, I believe in that case they would react to defend their cities. They would identify who the people are and they would take them out. I do believe that. But they're not going to do that over riots. We've already seen that. Good people, the good guys, they don't just run around killing people for no reason. They don't decide, I don't like their politics, I'm going to go kill them. They don't say, well, they took over the university, they took over Portland, let's go shoot them. That doesn't happen. But in the case of a war, an active, large-scale war, when people start to feel like they've got enemies among them, they're not going to tolerate it. They're not going to wait for the enemies to act. In that case, yes, we could have some civil war. The guerrilla style that Northern Ireland went through. But right now, don't get too upset. What we got to consider is this is a time to be alert. Watch the global maneuvers. Keep a close eye on these enemies. We're going to have to hit Iran to stop their nuclear program. The war in Ukraine is already going on. We're sitting on a powder keg just waiting for the spark. What will happen if we do take Iran, which we have to do? We cannot have a nuclear Iran. We've got to hit them. Russia's already warned us not to. China backs Russia. It's going to happen. We're going to hit Iran. So like my grandmother said, one day you wake up, the world is different and will never be the same. Everyone thinks someone is going to solve it before it happens. She saw it happen twice. She knew what she was talking about. We're there right now. I don't know if it's going to happen this summer. I don't know if it's going to happen this year, but it could blow at any moment. Because the one thing for sure is nobody sees it coming until it just blows. Even if you feel it coming, you don't know the time. At the beginning of the Civil War, one of the congressmen from the South, I believe it was in Alabama, had said, well, if there's a war, you'll be able to wipe up the blood with a handkerchief. No one thought it was going to happen. When they had the first Battle of Bull Run, soldiers rushed to get there because they thought that was going to be the whole war. They didn't want to miss the war. That wasn't even one of the big battles. But everyone thought it was just going to be a dust-up fight and over with. They always think that. Remember, we weren't going to get involved in either one of the first two world wars. America was sworn to, committed to not getting involved. Except now we would be involved with the start. We've never been involved with the beginning of a world war. There's no reason to think we wouldn't be, since now we are the target of it. We are the big dogs. We're the ones that the other countries want to we stand in the way of that. So yes, it's going to happen. I'm convinced there's no question it's going to happen in my lifetime unless suddenly I have a heart attack. We don't know when, but it's close, and everyone should consider that and be prepared. A lot of people are already preparing, but forget all this talk about civil war erupting any day now. Not going to happen. The good guys won't do it. The bad guys won't do it until they've got the cover of a world war to do it in. But there's a lot to think about. We got to consider, what would World War III look like today? With all these electronics, with all the drones, with all the dependency on internet, satellite communications. We're going to talk about that in the next episode. But I hope this kind of helps clear up some of the rumors and unrest about what's going on right now, because these Democrats aren't starting a civil war. We aren't already in a civil war. There's no cities burned. There's no opposing forces in the field. Don't let the hyper people mislead you. It's not here. Right now, what we've got is some bad guys acting up, doing stupid things. I hope this brings some clarity. There's a lot to chew on. I hope it gave you some food for thought. We're going to continue to do this. This new YouTube channel is only a week and a half old. We've got several episodes that have already been produced and published. Appreciate you going back and looking at them if you're curious. We've got a lot more coming out. As I already said, the next one is going to be what would World War III look like? Because it's 80 years past the last one, everything is different. We've got to consider what it would really be, because it will touch all of us. Yes, the news tells us about what already happened. It's up to us to think about what can happen, what the future brings. You can't be prepared if you don't consider it. This YouTube channel is only a week and a half old. We moved everything over here. This is going to be the focus. We really need your support. Please click the like button. Please subscribe. If you subscribe, you'll get the notifications on the upcoming episodes. You can go back in the channel and look at what we already produced and published. We're going to bring you a different perspective than what you get in the news. And we're going to do it without any favoritism for any party, because, truthfully, we aren't well represented by any party today. President Trump is out there fighting for us, working for free. And he's not getting the kind of support out of the Republican Party that he should be. So we're not going to softball it and hold them up as any kind of great saviors for us, okay? We're just going to lay out the truth, describe the history, use a constitutional perspective when that applies. Because there's too many untruths going around about our Constitution. There's too many times when it is left out of the discussion when it applies. We need to get in the algorithms. To do that, we need the subscriptions. We need the likes. I hope we earned it from you. May God continue to bless America.